In 1969, a small fishing nation on the edge of Europe struck oil. Not a little oil. Not a promising deposit worth exploring. A field so massive it rewrote the geological maps of the entire North Sea. And the country that found it had fewer people than the city of Los Angeles. Here is what usually happens when a poor country finds oil. The money floods in, politicians celebrate, governments spend, and within 2 or 3 generations, the country is poorer than it was before the discovery. Economists have a name for it. They call it the resource curse, and it has destroyed Nigeria, Venezuela, Angola, and dozens of others. Norway found the same oil, the same North Sea, the same windfall. Today, every single Norwegian citizen, every man, woman, and child, is worth $357,000. Not in future pension promises, not in government benefits, in real money, sitting in a real fund, invested in real companies around the world. A fund worth $2 trillion. The largest sovereign wealth fund in the history of the planet. This is how they did it. And this is why, in 60 years of trying, almost no one else has been able to copy them. In 1958, the scientific consensus was clear. There was no oil under the Norwegian continental shelf. The geology was wrong. The depth was wrong. The whole idea was a waste of drilling equipment. Then something happened across the border. In 1959, the Netherlands discovered a massive natural gas field in Groningen. Geologists looked at the maps again, and they started asking uncomfortable questions about what might be sitting under the North Sea. Norway moved carefully. In 1963, before a single well had come up positive, the Norwegian government made a decision that would define the next 6 decades. It declared full sovereignty over its entire continental shelf. Every barrel of oil, every cubic meter of gas, everything beneath those cold gray waters belonged to Norway. Not to oil companies, not to foreign investors, to Norway. Drilling licenses went out in 1965. The first wells came up dry. Then dry again. 4 years of nothing. Then on December 23, 1969, 2 days before Christmas, Phillips Petroleum hit something that changed everything. The Ekofisk field, one of the largest offshore oil deposits ever found. Production began in 1971, and Norway was suddenly a completely different country. A nation of fishermen had just become one of the most oil-rich places on Earth. The question was, what would they do with it? Look at what was happening to other oil nations at exactly this same moment. Venezuela in the 1970s was one of the wealthiest countries in all of Latin America. Oil revenues came in faster than the government could count them. They spent on subsidies, on state companies, on promises. By 2019, annual inflation had hit 1,000,000%. Citizens were eating from garbage cans. Children were dying from diseases that had been eradicated decades earlier. The oil hadn't saved Venezuela. The oil had destroyed it. Nigeria earned over $1 trillion in petroleum revenues since discovering oil in 1956. Today, 63% of Nigerians live in poverty. Not because the oil ran out, because the money was stolen, mismanaged, and burned through by government after government after government. Norway looked at these examples, and they made a different choice. In 1972, the government established Statoil, a fully state-owned oil company. The rule was radical and non-negotiable. 50% of every oil license went to the state. Foreign corporations could drill, but half of everything that came up belonged to Norway. Every barrel pumped from Norwegian waters would generate revenue that stayed in Norway. But owning the oil was only the first step, because having money and keeping money are 2 completely different skills. And most of history's greatest fortunes, personal, national, and generational, have proven that the second skill is far rarer than the first. By the mid-1980s, the oil revenues were enormous. Built roads. They expanded the welfare-built roads. They expanded the welfare state. They subsidized industries that couldn't compete on their own. Norway became comfortable, and comfortable countries stopped paying attention. Then, in 1986, Oil prices collapsed, from $27 a barrel to under $10. In months. The Norwegian budget, built around the assumption that oil money would always be there, fell apart almost overnight. It was a warning, a loud, expensive, humiliating warning. And Norway actually listened. In 1990, Parliament passed a law creating the Government Petroleum Fund. The concept was almost absurdly simple. All oil revenues would be completely removed from the Norwegian economy and invested abroad. Not spent at home. Invested abroad. The logic was this. If you spend oil money inside your own economy, you create inflation, you make your own industries uncompetitive, and you build a government that can only function when oil prices are high. But if you take that money out, park it in global markets, in foreign stocks, in bonds and real estate in other countries, you build something that grows regardless of what happens to the price of a barrel of crude. The first actual deposit into the fund didn't happen until 1996. Norway waited 6 years for its budget to generate a real surplus before putting a single krone in. That first deposit was $300 million. It is now $2 trillion. But the deposit was only half the story. The other half was the rule that protected it. Norway created what they call the fiscal rule. The government is permitted to spend no more than 3% of the fund's total value per year. That number, 3%, was chosen deliberately. It roughly matches the expected long-term real return on global investments, which means, in theory, the fund's purchasing power never shrinks. You spend the returns. You never touch the principal. This sounds simple. This sounds obvious. This sounds like basic financial common sense. And yet, in the entire recorded history of governments managing natural resource revenues, almost none of them have managed to hold this line. Norway has held it for 30 years. Every year, politicians face pressure to spend more. Unions demand it. Citizens ask for it. Every election cycle, someone promises to dip deeper into the fund. And every year, the rule holds. The fund owns shares in 8,763 companies across 71 countries. Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, Samsung, Nestlé, Volkswagen. On average, Norway owns 1.5% of every publicly listed company in the world. Every time you buy an iPhone, every time you fill up a Volkswagen, every time someone anywhere in the world shops on Amazon, Norway gets a fraction of that transaction. Every day, every hour, forever. Here are the numbers that stop people mid-sentence. Norway has 5.6 million people, about the same as the state of Colorado. The fund has $2 trillion in assets. That is $357,000 per citizen. Every child, every retiree, every person. The median American household, after a lifetime of working, has a net worth of approximately $192,000. A Norwegian baby born today already has nearly twice that before they have taken a single step or spoken a single word, simply because of a fund their grandparents built. The fund holds $500 billion in American stocks alone. It is one of the largest single investors on the New York Stock Exchange. If Norway decided tomorrow to liquidate its American holdings, the resulting sell-off would trigger a market crisis that would be felt in every 401k in the United States. A country smaller than California controls enough capital to destabilize Wall Street. In 2024, the fund generated $222 billion in investment returns. In a single year. That is more than the entire annual GDP of Portugal, more than New Zealand, more than Hungary, generated in 12 months by a fund from a country most Americans could not find on a map without help. And here is the detail that breaks the model entirely. Oil is no longer the primary driver of the fund's growth. Investment returns now account for more than half of the total value. Norway built a machine that has outgrown its own fuel source. The oil could stop tomorrow, and the fund would keep growing. But nothing this large exists without cracks. The fund's own managers have started saying something quietly in reports and interviews that critics have been saying loudly for years. Norway may have accidentally built a trap. When a government has $2 trillion working for it, The pressure to build a competitive private sector, to innovate, to export, to compete, goes away. Why struggle when the fund already handles it? Norwegian productivity growth has lagged behind comparable economies for 2 decades. Non-oil exports are modest for a country this wealthy. An entire generation has grown up in an economy cushioned so completely from failure that the instinct to build something from nothing has begun to fade. There is also a contradiction that Norway has not resolved. The fund made its money from oil, from fossil fuels, from the same carbon emissions that Norway's politicians describe as an existential threat. In 2024, Norway announced the opening of new oil fields because the fund needs revenue, and oil is how that revenue comes in. The country simultaneously lectures the world on climate responsibility and pumps more crude to feed the machine it built. Whether that is pragmatism or hypocrisy is a question Norwegians are increasingly asking each other. So what does a $2 trillion oil fund teach anyone who will never have a $2 trillion oil fund? 3 things. First, own what you have. Norway didn't let foreign corporations extract its wealth and leave. Every barrel that came out of the ground came back, in revenue, in equity, in ownership. Most people, most families, most countries give away their most valuable assets without realizing it. Norway didn't. Second, separate the money from the people who want to spend it. The fund is managed by Norges Bank Investment Management, a professional institution, insulated from politics. When the fund decided to sell all its oil and gas stocks in 2019, politicians didn't interfere. When it voted against CEO pay packages at major corporations, no minister called to reverse the decision. The moment you let politicians make daily investment decisions, the money is already gone. Third, spend only the return. Never touch the principal. This rule sounds so simple that it feels insulting to say out loud. And yet the United States, with every resource Norway had, plus more, oil, gas, coal, the most productive agricultural land in the world, the reserve currency of the planet, currently sits on $36 trillion in national debt. Not because America had fewer resources, because America could not stop spending what it had. Norway looked at $2 trillion and made a decision most nations have never been able to make. This is not ours to spend. This belongs to the people who come after us. That idea, that wealth is not just for now, but for everyone who hasn't been born yet, sounds like the kind of thing you'd find in a children's book. And yet in the entire history of nations, almost no one has actually done it. Margin call stories. Where fortunes rise, empires fall, and history repeats.